thank you all for being here, and thank you to the audience. We're going to get right into it. So the African continent's population, as we've spoken about today, is projected to reach over 1 billion people by 2040 and will become the largest workforce globally, mainly concentrated in urban areas. Bogolo, I'll start with you. What steps can be taken to ensure that this demographic dividend translates into meaningful and sustainable growth?
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's such a pleasure to be able to join you. That question is very loaded because there are various ways to look at it, but the one area that I choose to think about it is from an economic and social perspective. What is key right now is to make sure that the economy functions in order to provide sustainable livelihoods to the very youthful population. And it is with building the economy, with providing access to jobs, access to industrialization, to healthcare, to basic systems that we can truly say we will be able to harness the demographic dividend to grow the economy in the continent. And there are several aspects that we need to put in place in order to realize this. First of all, what does it mean that by 2050, 47% of the youthful population will be in the continent? It essentially means that the labor force for the world will be in the continent. But are we training that labor force to ensure that youthful population, to ensure that it actually translates into a labor force? And then our policies actively promoting industrialization and value addition to ensure that that labor force actually translates goods and the development into something that is worth trading. And then lastly, that demographic, as it gets older, is it termed as a lost generation, or is it one that has sustainable livelihoods and are actively adding to the growth of the economies? And we see this shift of African countries from low income to middle income and hopefully to high income. That is what it means by harnessing the demographic dividend. In the end, having livelihoods that are not solely dependent on the social welfare system of a government, but also are able to realize in their own spaces livelihoods and incomes that can also propel the general economy.
Absolutely. Hanan, I would love to throw that question now over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what we need to actually reap the benefits of that youth dividend and population dividend is to actually have a paradigm shift of what we have seen before. We need to have policy making that focuses on moving up the value chain rather than what we have seen in many African countries with exporting development opportunities by focusing on raw material and primary commodities. To actually have a more inclusive future for the youth and for the continent, we need to make sure that this is matched by, moving into higher value chain, producing rather than just exporting raw material, building on that raw material. And we need to actually lead the way and be forward-looking. And by that, for example, we have huge assets. We've talked already about the issue that we will be having the largest working age population across all continents very soon, and that's a huge asset. But we also have huge solar potential. For example, 60% of the world potential for solar comes from the continent. We have huge reserves of green minerals that we can actually use that to build value chain. And I loved actually one of the things that was said earlier today about just moving from being consumers of technologies and products to actually being producers and co-creators. And that's really the tipping point by which we can shift the future and utilize all this, increasing urbanization, because urbanization is usually associated with moving to manufacturing or more higher value added. However, in the continent, we have not seen that. We've seen the move from 30% of the population being in urban areas in 1990 to now almost 50%, but we have not seen that translate into higher value added. And this is really where we have to focus on to have a better future going forward.
Thank you. Kennedy, I'd love to
thank
hear
you
your
for Sadé.
perspective.
I just want to connect climate change and the urbanization. So, quick story. I grew up in Kibera slum, the largest slum in Africa. My parents were climate refugee. There was no rain that used to be. They don't understand why. They moved to the city, Nairobi. No place to go. They ended up in the slums. And that was my life. And I'm really angry that we still talk about these issues, because we know the solution. Honestly, leadership, we need governments, leaders that are really selfless. And I love my continent, and today I'm happy I'm talking to many Africans in the room. Our issues is leadership. Look at Rwanda. You see, for example, in my community, it's amazing. The youth already, they are doing exams for the European and American students. That's talent. I'm sorry, don't arrest me. But that's talent. How can the government, how can we create more opportunities? Another thing that will be neglected, informal sector. You go to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, you will see these innovative ideas. Why can't we invest in that? Let me tell you something. If we don't really work on this, we are going to see a lot of chaos. The wealth that is being created will be destroyed. I already see something in South Africa. I see the youth are angry. The youth want to be involved. So right now it's good for us really to listen to them. Why do you have to send our coffee to Europe? Why can't we use our raw materials and create product and create jobs? Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So Hanan, you talked about how urbanization kind of shows up differently on the continent. So I want to talk about, sort of rural versus urban. How important is the localization of aid and development in rural areas, and what can be done to ensure that global initiatives are effectively tailored to meet the needs of African cities and communities? And Kennedy, I'd love to start with you.
Thank you. So I also believe in localization, and I think most of the time, let's be honest. How did aid started? So that's a challenging thing. So I feel like development sectors don't want to, our partner, don't want to listen to the problem of the people on the ground. You know what I mean? Because if you really go to the villages, if you go to the cities, you see these young people, local leaders, have innovative ideas. But where is the money coming from? You have to write proposals. You have to read the metrics, not on our own terms, but on the Western term. So that's the problem. So I think that for us to fight this is that we have to start changing the systems of how things happen. You cannot really solve a problem if you don't work with the people who are in that issue. So the first thing is that if we all agree that solution is Africans, and Africans are the solution, what they need is opportunity and resources, right? I think that's the same way with working organization in local communities.
Thank you. Yeah. So Hanan, how can we break through the risk aversion to Kennedy's point associated with investing in Africa? And why are meaningful partnerships so important?
I think there are a number of issues in terms of the investment obstacles. Some of them have to do with perceptions. For example, if you look at surveys that look into investor perceptions, especially foreign investors that are contemplating, meaning prospective investors, versus those that are in the continent, you'll see a diversion in this. One is more worried about those that are already in the continent are more worried about, for example, stability of energy supply or infrastructure or skills, whereas prospective ones, the key concern is always political risk and socioeconomic risk and instability. So we have to bridge that gap between existing investors and prospective ones. That's one area. But of course, a very important other issue is the availability of affordable finance. And this is a key issue that we need to tackle, and we've been working extensively on these issues at United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Part of what is needed is availability of things like blended finance, guarantees, credit enhancements, so it can lower the cost of finance for the private sector. To be able to crowd in the private sector, we can no longer look forward expecting that the state can do this humongous task with the level of growth that would be required, as well as the population growth. So we need to enable the private sector by availing both the kind of the policies, meaning the policy certainty and stability, as well as issues of finance, availing finance, and that would be key. And I think we need to also learn to sell better, opportunities on the continent, because this is a continent that will have a huge, population growth. It will have one of the largest workforce, and it has also a lot of natural assets. So we need to sell the opportunities of what the continent has, but also work very closely, and if I may say, openly with investors to determine what is needed. And there are a number of examples, including African countries, that have done this. Engage with them, on what is it, what are the obstacles, what are the policy changes, and when you do the policy changes, how is it affecting them, and how are you calibrating? I think we need more of these kind of investor platforms that engage with the government and that kind of, gives feedback to help the way forward.
What I'm hearing from all of you is that engagement and engaging different stakeholders, engaging with one another is a key part of the solution. So Bogolo, you've been an advocate for accelerating digitization and innovation in Africa. How can these technologies play a role in ensuring better investments and job opportunities for the next gen?
If I may hijack your question a little bit.
Of course.
I was just reflecting on what Kennedy and Hanan were saying. I feel like one of our main challenges in localization is trying to do things as they are done in Europe or the US and say that we are serving local communities. And this is why, in the end, the aid that comes with projects that are tailored based on what happens in Europe end up failing and do not achieve their objectives. And what we're seeing now with the increased conversation of development and climate change in particular is the reflection in indigenous knowledge, in indigenous practices, in indigenous goods and services. And with that increased interest in that space, I think if we truly want to serve local communities, we need to invest more in technology, infuse it with indigenous knowledge, deal with R&D around indigenous knowledge, and really ensure that these communities are able to progress. One of the main failures of modern economics is suggesting that there is no place for indigenous knowledge in the modern economic theories. And as a result, we were anticipating, or the theories had said, we would see this accelerated inclusion of people from the informal sector into the formal sector. But we haven't seen that happening in Africa. We haven't seen it happening in local communities because the skills, the resources that modern day economics is based on is not in the continent. And if we reroute the way we think about economics and what a product is to capture and encapsulate indigenous knowledge, we will be able to start bringing in the formerly and previously excluded communities into the economic space and therefore generate more opportunities. And then it brings us into the conversation of what are investments. A lot of times we talk about investments from an FDI perspective, and we even forget to talk about domestic resource mobilization. We have a lot of billionaires in the continent.
True.
What are we doing about the capital and the finance that is raised through the pension funds in the continent? A lot of our pension funds go to Australia, they go to BlackRock and many others. Once, I will give you a quick example, Sadé. We went to Australia looking for investors when I was still serving as Minister of Investment. We got there and the investors there said, but this is your money. This is your pension money that you are asking to send back to you. We've used it to build our roads, but the way we even think about investing in our own economies is it is too risky. If we cannot take a chance in investing in our own economies through our domestic resource mobilization, what makes us think that FDI would flow at big lumps and sums that we truly need to have real change and real monumental change? So I think that these two pieces that we should address, first to see the real economic paradigm shift that Hanan was speaking to. Otherwise, if we don't deal with these internal issues and the way we think about where we come from, what we truly know, then we will not truly achieve the Africa Rising moniker.
Kate, my sister there, has to go to New York. Hey, how many billionaires do we have in Africa, in Nigeria, in South Africa? It's time Africa to support themselves.
But let's be clear a little bit, Sadé. It's time that we support ourselves, but we do need partnerships. So bring the money. We're not saying we don't want American money.
Money with no condition.
No condition.
We do want
No condition.
You heard it here first. No, this is great. So I think one of the things that we haven't spoken about specifically, which we're kind of circling around, is poverty.
Right.
High poverty rates are still a major concern in African communities. So Kennedy, given your background, can you share your personal journey and insights into what it looks like to create growth in impoverished communities?
Wow. So for me, that's my story. So growing up in this large informal settlement, and knowing that you have no hope, you feel invisible. And that's what really great for you is you don't care. When you don't care, you want to join the crime. You can be a terrorist, right? Because you don't see value of life. And I think for us really to fight poverty, the biggest thing we have to do is to understand the local context. I've seen some housing project happening in my community when I was a young boy. They didn't understand our social context. They were just coming, building this apartment that was not really working for us, right? So I think the first thing is to listen to the community and find out how do they want to come out of that poverty. Because most of the time, they have the answers, but there's no one to listen to them.
If I may add actually to this, I've led before work on private sector diagnostics, and that entailed discussions and consultations with various private sector, domestic and international. And in some countries, countries would give huge incentives, be it land, tax breaks, and others for investors to come and invest in the impoverished areas. But nobody comes. And then when you go and talk to the private sector, why haven't you invested there? Said, you can take all this, just give us the road to the closest port, and we'll do it. So you will need to really engage to understand what is holding it back, rather than just giving incentives that may not meet what are the needs of the private sector to create jobs in these areas.
Absolutely. Do you want to add on
Yeah,
that?
I think one area is providing access to education, access to services that are trade facilitating, that are industry facilitating, that are also facilitating access to jobs, amongst others. And I was just from Kennedy's example, you know, I also come from a very poor village, and it is because of the free education that was provided that I was able to build myself, and many others will tell the same story, that having free education has helped them unlock different opportunities. But over and above unlocking, having access to education, it's also about having a functional government system. And Kennedy spoke to this earlier, in we need leaders that are focusing on the improvement of society and communities, and that are actually really prepared to put money behind ambitions. What we currently have is, we talk about these ambitions, we want to reduce poverty, reduce inequality, but when it comes to it, backing up those ambitions with real investment, taking a chance on digital innovations by young people, we tend to shy away from that. So we need to actively back those. The AFCFTA is up and running. It's supposed to be under implementation. Many heads of states have stood up and said, we are back in the AFCFTA. But when it comes to actually tariff reductions, it is taken forever to really see that progress. So the main thing I would say across the board of policy and across the private sector is, do back up your ambitions with finance. Back up your ambition with implementation, and back them up really seriously with opening up of markets. And if we do not back up ambitions with real action, we will not see the growth and the reduction of poverty that we want.
Well, I wish that we could sit here all day, because I am so enjoying listening to all of you, but we can't. But if I could just quick takeaway, paradigm shifts from Hanan, engage with the youth, talk to them from Kennedy, and lean on indigenous knowledge from Bogolo. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.